Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's episode of Park Home Life. Over the past week or two I have been down a nettle rabbit hole. I've mentioned it here and there. It started because I was chatting via messenger with a lady called Nancy, who's in our lovely community, who's over in Canada I believe, across the pond anyway, about natural dyeing, and we got into nettles and I started telling her about the film The Nettle Dress, which is featuring Alan Brown and his journey creating fibres and eventually cloth and a garment, a dress from nettles over a period of 7 years. And many years ago I used to dye with nettles, dye cloth. Sorry, I keep fiddling with my hair because it's wet. I've just washed it. That's why it's all around the front. What was I saying? Yes. And I hadn't done it for a long time. I don't think I dyed with nettles in France at all, so not for 7 years. But anyway, I was inspired to try again, and so I thought I'd share that with you as part of this week's video, and I'll talk a little bit more about natural dyeing in a minute, but also to say that inspired by Alan Brown and the fibre that you can get from nettles, I also twined some string, and that became me making a little vessel, a bowl. So at the end of the video I'll show you all my naturally dyed cloth, and I'll show you my string and my little nettle bowl that I've made. Just to also say, because I filmed this over a period of several days and several dye sessions, somewhere in the mix I lost a bit of footage. I'm really sorry about that. I can't find it anywhere. I either didn't press record or I've deleted it inadvertently. It happens between when I do the first dye bath and then I talk about modifying with iron. I have put a message on the screen post-edit so that you can see. So then following on from that, I mention a couple of things. I talk about the eco printing stick that I used to wrap my thread around and how it had marked the cloth and things like that. And you won't know what I'm talking about because the original bit of footage. Anyway, so hopefully the video makes some sense, and hopefully me saying this now and when I show you the bits and pieces at the end will cover the gaps. So just to say about natural dyeing, I do naturally dye, but I consider myself more of an eco printer. So sorry, I can't get my words out this morning. While I do know some of the theory and I've had a certain amount of experience over the years, I don't naturally dye in the proper expert way. Now, the processes involved are scouring, which involves boiling the cloth with an alkaline such as washing soda to remove all the gunk that's in it, whether it's new cloth or old cloth. And then mordanting appropriate to the fibres. Fibres are broadly split into two groups, either protein fibres from an animal source, such as silk and wool, or cellulose fibres from a plant source, such as linen and cotton are the most common two, but obviously there are others. And the mordanting process that you use for those two groups of fibre can be quite different. Wool, for example, is traditionally mordanted with potassium aluminium sulfate, which is what is commonly referred to as alum, and that's the alum that is sometimes available in grocery stores and health food stores and things like that. That is not really a mordant for cellulose fibres. You can use it to mordant cellulose, but then you have to do a more involved process which involves tannin, soaking the cloth in a tannin, usually a gallnut extract, which is one of the clearer tannins. It doesn't colour the cloth, and then the alum, and then some people tannin and alum again. And then following on from that, they then do a process which is called dunging, because traditionally it was done with animal dung, but these days people usually use calcium carbonate. So it's taken me quite a long time to say all that. It takes even longer to do all that, obviously. So there's another mordant, or there's a few actually, for cellulose, which you can do in just one step and cold. You don't need to use any energy. And that is, well, for years I've used alum acetate as a one-step mordant, and that you have to get from a dye, a proper online source. And I'll put a few links in the description box below. But recently, in the last few years, another alum mordant has become available in some parts of the world. It's not available everywhere. I've mentioned this before, and I know some of you have had problems getting it, and that's called alum lactate, which you use in exactly the same way as alum acetate. It's a one-step cold mordant, but it's a byproduct of the sugar and starch industry, and I use that because I can get it here in the UK, and I prefer the environmental aspects of it. Alum acetate is safe to use, you know, with some recommendations of wearing gloves and not inhaling the powder and that kind of thing. But the way it's produced can have a detrimental effect on the environment. So that's why I prefer, if possible, to use alum lactate, and that's why I recommend alum lactate if you can get it. Now, alum lactate, you basically dissolve the quantity of alum that you require in some hot water, and that can just be hot tap water, a small amount, and then you put it into a container of cold water, and that's your mordant. And in terms of quantity, the recommended amounts are anywhere between 5 and 10% alum to weight of fibre. So for example, if you had 100 grams of fibres, cloths, you would use 10 grams of alum, which roughly equates to 2 teaspoonfuls. I am not that precise anymore. I have a big old aluminium pan outside with alum in that I just keep forever. I mean, I got rid of it in France and started again. And then every time I put cloth in, I put in about half the amount of alum that I should. Do you see what I mean? Because there's alum still in the pot. So all that, I kind of said all that really just to demonstrate that I do know the theory. I do know what the rules are, but I don't entirely follow the proper process. So it really just depends what you want to do. If you want to become a proficient natural dyer, producing beautiful cloths that are uniform in colour, and you can get repeatable results that are light fast and wash fast and suitable for making garments and, you know, whatever else, then you absolutely need to follow due process. So due process is all those steps I mentioned: choosing your mordant appropriate to the cloth that you're using and the mordanting process, proper scouring, having a correct quantity of water in the dye bath so that your cloth can move around and all that kind of thing. And the other big key important thing, which is maybe obvious but I'll say it anyway, is choosing an appropriate dye material. Not all plants are dye materials. And you often see things recommended online that just don't last for any length of time. And the most common ones are, let me get my back up a little bit to be honest, is the beetroot and the red cabbage. Because to say they're ephemeral is not even, you know, they'll last a few days, they'll rinse out straight away. Same with a lot of the berries. And I did experiment with those things when I was first starting out, before I, you know, really knew what I was doing. And they literally just wash out or fade to a not pleasant grey colour. So I wouldn't waste my time or energy or resources messing about with those. Yes, you get a lovely pinky purple, blue, whatever in the beginning, but they really won't last. Yeah, there's my little rant about beetroot and red cabbage. But there are many plants across the world which do give colour. I can't possibly list them all, even if I knew them all. But what I would recommend is that you find a reliable source, either from a book or online. There's lots of information online. The issue is filtering the good information from the not so good. A couple of names that I can throw at you is Jenny Dean, very reliable, very experienced natural dyer here in the UK. Suzanne Deckel, or Dekel, I'm not sure how she pronounces her name, but it's Dekel. She's got a very comprehensive website. And Maiwa, which is based in Canada, on their website there's a downloadable PDF guide to natural dyeing which explains all the processes that I referred to earlier. But I would say if you're Googling around, the minute you see someone talking about beetroot or red cabbage, that's a red flag. That I would click straight away from that as not reliable information. So yeah, that's just my take on that. It's probably the only thing that I get a bit cross about. The thing is, you see people showing these beautiful results, they've got these lovely pinky purples, and people get all excited and go off and have a go. And then they're super disappointed when they find that it just washes out or fades in no time at all. So that's why I get cross about it. And then people think that's all of natural dyeing, because natural dyeing done properly in the ways I've described, not necessarily how I'm about to do it now, but done properly in those ways I've described, the colour is as fast and true as any synthetic dye. When I worked for the Victoria and Albert Museum, I saw cloth or things made from cloth that were literally hundreds of years old, still brightly coloured. And I've also been in the museum in Aubusson in France, which is famous for its carpets and rugs. And there again, colours are hundreds of years old, thousands of years old even, and still coloured. So this kind of myth that natural dyes by their nature are ephemeral is not true. It depends what plant materials you choose and how you choose to use them. So yeah, I'll calm down now. I don't know why I get agitated about it. I think because I feel passionate about it and I want people to enjoy it and have a good experience, and you know, so I get a little bit upset when people are led down the garden path, so to speak. So yeah, so if you go and do research about, the other thing you can do is just experiment with little bits of local plant material and see what happens. An easy and low impact way to experiment is solar dyeing. So you literally just get a jar of water, you put your dye material in it, and you put it in the sun or in a warm place, and then you put a little piece of cloth in. I would choose, if you've got a little piece of silk or something, if you don't want to mordant properly, and see if any colour comes out. And that way you're just using solar energy, a jam jar and some water, you know, and a tiny scrap of cloth. That's a good way of experimenting. So basically, yes, that's what I've got to say about the theory of natural dyeing. So for this video, nettles, I'm going to take you into the woods and talk a little bit about how I'm choosing what to harvest and how I harvest. And then I'm going to take you through the process, which lasted several days, of creating the dye bath, putting some cloth in it. I do use both cellulose and protein fibres. I use a bit of silk, raw silk, some wool and some linen and some threads. The silk, actually, you can mordant with alum lactate. And I say in the video that I haven't mordanted it, but actually that I misspoke. I did. I put the silk, the raw silk, in the alum solution, kind of as an afterthought. I sort of remembered that I could, so I did. So silk you can put in the alum lactate or alum acetate solution. The wool, however, I didn't mordant. That should have been mordanted with potassium alum sulfate, the alum, but I don't have any, and I don't do it often enough to justify getting some and you know, going through that whole process. So you will get colour on protein fibres without mordant. However, depending on the plant material, etc., and what you do with them, they will not be as wash fast and as light fast as if you had mordanted, and the colour will not be as rich or as true. So I hope that's all clear. In terms of light fastness and wash fastness, however you do it, in the early days it was recommended to me by the person that I learnt a lot from, to, if I was creating cloth that I wanted to use in a project to make a quilt or garments or whatever, or bags, or, you know, anything, and I was concerned about how the colour would hold up, was to do a light fast test. And that's very easily done. You just take little swatches of your dyed cloth and you stick them onto a piece of card, and then you cover half of the pieces, half of the swatches with another piece of card, and then you date it and you put it in a window and you leave it and you keep an eye, and then after a week or two you can take your strip of card off and see if there's a difference, see if the colour's faded or not. A wash fast test is simply wash the cloth before you use it in the same way that you intend to wash the finished article. So if you're going to make a dress, for example, and you know that dress is going to be washed in the washing machine, then wash your cloth in the washing machine first. Do you see what I mean? If you're not bothered if things fade, then don't bother. But, you know, I'm just telling you what you can do, you know, if you are bothered. Anyway, that was a lot of wittering. So I'll cut into the video now. We'll go into the woods, we'll get the nettles, and we'll do the dyeing process. And then at the end of the video, I'll show you all the finished cloths washed and ironed, my nettle string bowl, and also I didn't put the dye bath on my tomatoes yet, as I will refer to later in the video. I then used it and did a little bit of eco printing. It's a bit early in the year. I normally start late summer, but it's been so hot here I thought I'd give it a go. So I mordanted up a bit of linen and a bit of old flannel sheet, and I did some eco printing in my leftover nettle dye bath, and I'll show you that at the end as well, because I was quite pleasantly surprised with that I got such good results. Okay, so I hope you enjoy the video.
Okay, so here we are in the woods. I've got my basket. I've already cut some in the lane. I just want to show you it's a little bit late in the year here in the UK. It's mid-July. I would prefer to be doing this in spring with the new growth. So what I'm looking for now are nettles that are not flowering. So it's a good place if they're trimmed or cut back anywhere in your area and then they regrow, that would work. But otherwise, just do your best if you want to have a go with what there is, and then in spring we'll try again and see if there's any difference in colour. But in general, I've found in the past that spring nettles give the green a colour. And as you go on in through the year, the flavonoids, the phytochemicals, use a normal word, Catherine, the chemicals in the plant, the flavonoids begin to predominate, which gives the yellows. And that's the most common colour you get actually with natural dye plants, are the yellows from the flavonoids. So the other things to bear in mind, even with plants like nettles, that certainly in this part of the world are ubiquitous, is the forager's code. I wouldn't take this whole patch. I wouldn't take more than a third, and I never pull up by the roots. I only want the tops of the plants in this case, and never take the first plant you see and never take the last plant, because it might be the only one. Here ends the lecture. I know sometimes we get excited with this stuff and we maybe, don't think about other considerations, but so that's why I always mention it every time, to myself as well as you all. The other thing to recognise is, whilst this nettle, Urtica, I can never say the second part of the botanical name, Urtica dioica, I'll put it on the screen because nettle might mean different things to different people. If I use the botanical name, it's universal, so you can look it up. Yes, while to us here in this part of the world it's a common weed, to some species it's home, and especially some species of butterfly lay their eggs on the leaves. So I don't want to take away anybody's home. So what I'm cutting, I'll show you one I've already cut, is the top part coming into shot now. See that I've got a glove on. Some people are brave and do it without gloves, but I don't want to sting myself. Sort of the top, maybe 5 or 6 inches of the plant. But before I cut, I check under the leaves for eggs. And the other sign might be that if a leaf is curled in some way, that can give you a clue that there's something living there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a few more from this patch, and then I'll be back. Okay, back home, here's my basket full. I've got about the same quantity as will fit in my pot. Here's my pot. Lovely old aluminium jam pan that my neighbour gave me the other week that was knocking around in her shed, as she put it. So I'm going to spread them out on this table outside, it's not very windy today, and leave them for a couple of hours just in case there's any little beasties in them, just to give them a chance to crawl or fly away. And then I'll be back when I've done that. Okay, they've been laying there for a couple of hours, and they shouldn't be stingy anymore because they're wilted. So I'm just going to put them in my big pot here. If you hear me go ouch, then the stingy thing wasn't true. No, they're fine. If you're worried at all, or if you have very sensitive hands, always wear gloves. So I'm just dumping them all in there. Now I'm going to do this as a 2-step process. So you can put your cloth in as well and do it all in one go, but then you have to not mind picking out bits of leaf from your cloth. I am going to extract the dye from the leaves first, and with something like nettles, which are quite low in dye stuff, hello waspy, I want to get the maximum that I can. So I'm going to cover them with water, not too much, I'm going to just use this just to push. I'm not really crushing them, I'm just pushing them down. This is just, I never know if it's the pestle or the mortar. You know the thing. Doesn't matter. A thing. Just push them down so I don't need to put too much water over them to cover them. And then I'm going to cover them with water. Little beastie there. Go away. You don't want to be in there. And I'm going to take them indoors and cook, because I now have to do them indoors on my stove. And I'm going to bring it up and put a lid on so that it retains the heat better. And then I'm going to bring it up just to a gentle simmer, just so that the bubbles start to break the surface of the water. And then I'm going to hold it there for about 45 minutes. At that point I'm going to turn the heat off, and then I'm going to let it sit like that overnight. And then I'm going to take a view on the colour of the dye bath as to whether I think that's enough or whether I repeat that process. Okay, so I'm going to cover with water. You don't need to put huge volumes of water at this stage, just enough to cover the leaves. Bring it up to a gentle simmer. You don't want to boil it. If you boil it, everything tends to go brown. And it's pretty much the same rule with any soft plant material. If you've got bark or roots or things like that, then you can put more heat. But for soft plant material like leaves and the tips of stems, just a gentle simmer. Otherwise everything will go brown. Okay, so I'm going to go and do that, and then in 24 hours or so I'll be back to show you how it looks. I've just come back to show you the volume of water to see what I mean. Do you see, I can just see water at the level of the leaves, and if I push them down they're a fairly solid mass, but that's plenty of water. You can always, once you've got your dye bath extracted, dilute it if you need a bigger volume of water. So I might push them in every now and then. I'm going to keep a close eye that it doesn't boil heavily. I don't actually have a big enough lid for this pan. Lids are always an issue with thrifted pans. What I do have is my frying pan. Nettles are not toxic, you can eat them, so I'm not worried about using something I would use for food. Normally I wouldn't. You see, it doesn't cover it completely, but it kind of will help keep some of the heat in, so I'm improvising. So I'm going to leave that. I can hear it bubbling already. I'm going to keep a close eye and then set it just to simmer 45 minutes, leave it overnight with no heat, and then I'll come back to it tomorrow. Okay, it's the next day. I just wanted to show you the dye bath. I found this lid. It's not much good as a lid because it's got holes in, but anyway, it was outside. I didn't think I brought it from France, but there it was. Yesterday when I finished cooking it, many apologies, I did mean to film it to show you, and I just forgot. I'm sorry. It was the colour of apple juice. I nearly said something else then. Sorry, now from me laughing, you can probably guess what I was going to say. It was pale, it was kind of the colour of apple juice, apple cider vinegar, that kind of pale straw colour. So then it sat overnight. In comes a big spoon, sorry, hope that didn't frighten you. And can you see how dark it is now, just looking at it with the nettles in? When I put the spoon in, you'll see it's darker than the aforementioned liquids. But I would like it to be darker still. I have had it in the past much darker than that. I'm still thinking we might get yellow rather than green looking at it, but I am going to just bring it up to temperature again and just let it simmer maybe for another half hour, and then turn the heat off, and then when it's not so hot that I'm in danger of burning myself, I'll strain it and just through a colander and put it back in. And then I'll put the cloth in, but I'll show you all that. I maybe won't show you the straining because I need 2 hands for that. But yeah, literally just put the colander over another container, pour it in, give the nettles a good squish to get as much of the goodness out as I can, and then return the liquid to the pot. There'll be still little bits in, but you know, I'm not bothered about that. Okay, so that's how it looks after one boiling up and overnight, being left overnight. Okay, I'm outside and I just wanted to show you You're getting reflections obviously from the sun, but I hope you can see that it's almost black, and that's what you want. And if I put the spoon in, see it's very dark golden. Now I kept wittering on about yellow and how I feared I was going to get yellow. Where's my little bit gone now? No, sorry, I had a little piece of green cloth that I tested, tiny scrap, and can I find it? No, I cannot. Anyway, it was green, so I'm hopeful. Let me just try and angle differently for the sun. So I've now got another aluminium pot here, an outside one that's a bit grubby. It has had iron in it at one point, but I have rinsed it, but it's very possible that the iron that's been in it will sadden my dye. So, oh, I see it. One sec. There it is. You see why I couldn't find it? You see? It's got a definite greenish tinge. Now this is just a piece of unmordanted cotton, so hopefully my properly treated cotton and my protein fibres that I'm going to put in will be more coloured than that. I literally just dipped that in just as a test swatch, but you see it's definitely green. So going very slowly so I don't make you dizzy. So yes, I've got my other pot here. Doesn't matter about the pot really, just not an iron pot if you don't want to sadden your colour. Iron, the word is saddens, but it kind of darkens and makes more moody, and it can do things like change yellows to greens, and we might have a play later with some scraps and dip them in some iron water just to show you the difference. But for now I need to strain my dye bath, so I've got my big pot and my sieve, my colander, quite a fine colander, and I need 2 hands for this, but I'm basically just going to tip that into there and then squeeze the nettles, push down on them as best I can to get all the liquid out, and then rinse my original dye pot because it's clean enough to be taken indoors where I need to heat it, and return the dye bath to it, and then I'll take it back inside, okay? So before I do that, I'll just talk about the cloth I'm going to put in. I've got some bits here. Now the thing is, to get colour, and I talked about this in the onion skin dyeing video last year, to get good colour, don't put great big lumps of cloth into your dye bath, because if you think about it, there's a limited amount of colour, so the more cloth you put in, the paler and more blotchy your results will be. It's a very big temptation at the beginning when you first get into it and you're excited to go ramming great big lumps in. I know, been there, done that, but now I just put small bits. So I've got here a piece of silk noil, also known as raw silk in some parts of the world, and I'm probably going to only use half that because I'm just going to make this one little pouch. So I'm probably just going to tear that in half. Now, it was new cloth, it was gifted to me by my lovely friend Rosie, so I have washed it. I just put it through the laundry, you know, in the normal whitewash. The proper way is scouring. I'll talk more about that if you want to do it properly. I don't do it properly. But new cloth especially has got all kinds of gunk in it that really you need to get out so that the dye can attach. But because this is silk, so a protein fibre from an animal source, I'm not going to mordant it, so that's just washed raw silk. I've also got here a piece of woolly blanket, just old vintage wool, and I haven't mordanted that either, but I have soaked it overnight. You want all your cloth to be soaked for at least an hour. I usually just chuck it in water the day before because that opens up all the fibres and makes them more receptive to the dye. So woolly blanket, not mordanted either, because also obviously protein from an animal source. And then I've got this little grubby scrap of vintage linen that was my old gardening apron, and it was eco-printed a good few years ago now. And this is just a bit of it. It looks like an old rag, doesn't it? But I think it's beautiful. And although that was mordanted years ago, you can still see there a little bit of green eco-print there. I have mordanted it again because it's cellulose fibre. Now you could say it's already mordanted, so it wasn't necessary, but I just thought I would because I've got mordant anyway. Once mordanted, always mordanted generally. I've got some silk thread wound onto a little spool. Again, animal, so not mordanted. And then this is just one hank of white embroidery floss, and I did also put that in the alum. And I will talk sitting in my chair probably at the beginning of the video about the different kinds of alum, because it can be confusing. I use alum lactate because that's available to me here in the UK, and it's a more environmentally friendly option. But I'll talk about that. I will have talked about that already. So I'm going to stop filming now and strain my dye bath and then put my cloth in. Oh, just to say, I mentioned it in previous videos, I'm going to put the silk and the cotton and the threads in first and let them have about half of the time, which will be maybe 40 minutes, so I'll let them have 20 minutes, and then I'll add the woolly blanket, because wool is greedy and it tends to suck everything up. So I want to give the other fibres a chance to get their share of the dye before I introduce the greedy wool. It's like if you've got a buffet, you know, you don't want the greedy person getting in first because there's none left for anybody else. But that's just what I do. You could equally just shove it all in and, you know, be happy that your wool has a richer colour than the rest of it. So I'll stop filming, strain my dye bath, put the cloth in the dye bath, and then I'll be back. Okay, I've strained it, and you see my clump of nettles. I've squeezed it out as best I can with my two hands, just as if I was wringing out, you know, clothing or whatever. And I've just got this big ball of nettle goodness, which can just go in your compost bin or, you know, in your green waste. I should probably just take it back to the woods because I don't have a compost bin here. And then I'm going to put my sieve onto my rinsed, sorry that was a bit quick, onto my rinsed pot, just for good measure in case any bits got trapped, and pour my dye bath back into there through the sieve. I'm going to halve that piece of silk noil. I will measure them before I put them in and then give you just a rough idea, although it's only a guideline because I don't know how many nettles you've got, you know, I'm more vague with my basket full and all that. But just to give you a rough idea of the sizes of my pieces of cloth, okay? Okay, I'm back indoors. My raw silk piece is 34 inches by 10 inches. My woolly blanket is 14 by 9 inches. And my linen scrap is 12 inches by 8 inches. So 3 smallish pieces. I've kind of gone with twice the size of the noil because I'm thinking of cutting it in half once it's dyed and dipping half in iron to see the difference. So that's why I've gone for a bigger piece of noil. So I've put my dye bath back on the stove and put the heat on, and it's the same as before. Try not to boil it. If you boil it, it brings out the browns, like I said. So you just want to bring it back up to heat. It doesn't even really need to simmer. It just needs to be at that point, you know, when it starts to steam. And then hold it at that temperature for 40 minutes. Turn the heat off, leave it overnight again. This is slow dyeing. This is not a quick process. You know, it takes several days from start to finish, but that's one of the things I love about it. So I'm just going to take my damp cloth. Here goes my bit of linen, and drop it in and just spread it out in the dye bath as best you can. I don't mind a bit of mottling, you know, a bit of mottling. If you don't want mottling, just tiny bits in a big volume. You could dilute the dye bath. The colour in there is the colour in there. You know, you don't make the colour weaker by adding more water. If you add a huge amount of water and a tiny bit of cloth, then the dye molecules might have trouble finding the cloth, but you don't dilute the colour. I hope that makes sense. So, you know, if you wanted to put bigger cloth in and get a paler colour, you could by all means add more water to your pot, and then you could add water from your kettle, for example, to bring the temperature up. So that's gone in. Sorry for the clang. And I'm going to put my threads in, and I just put them in like that, wrap round the stick. Focus, hocus pocus. And I kind of do them crissy-crossy on purpose, because then they sort of act as a resist over each other, and you get a beautiful, almost variegated effect. The sticks don't come to any harm. This is a vintage spool. In fact, it improves them because it kind of dyes them a bit as well. So drop that in. It will float, but no worries. This is just around a bit of one of my eco print dowels. This was, like I said, a whole hank of white floss. The silk, I think, how much was there. I didn't measure it, to be honest, but you can see there's not very much. You can still see stick through it. Obviously the thicker you wind your thread on there, the less the dye will penetrate the underlayers, but you know, if that's a look you like, then certainly do more. But this is just all for my little pouch that I want to make, so I'm just doing enough. So I checked in advance that my stick fitted in this pan. The dye bath, it's non-toxic and it shouldn't stain my hands too much, so I'm happy to put my hands in there. And it's just hand hot now. So I put those in, and then I can use the bit of silk oil to kind of weigh them down, hopefully. And this is a long, thin bit, so I sort of drop it in, and it comes like this, so that it soaks up. Maybe it'll be handier if I get the spoon out of the... Sorry, it goes blurry. Get the spoon out of the way. Do, if you've got any sensitivities at all, even though nettles are non-toxic, have your windows open when you're doing things like this. So I'm just sort of feeding it in, one-handed, because the other hand's holding the phone. And then just swirl it around a bit. And while it's cooking, you could come and move it around every, 10 minutes or so if you want to try and get more even results. And push those under. You could of course put a plate or something on them, but I don't mind. They kind of wick it up anyway. And when I put the woolly blanket in there in 20 minutes or so, that will help weigh them down even more. So as I pass, I'll just push it under the surface and it'll be fine. It's now getting quite hot, so I'm going to keep a close eye on the temperature so that it doesn't boil. Set my timer for 20 minutes, then add the wool. Leave it for a further 20 minutes at the just smoking or just under a simmer, and then I'm going to turn the heat off and leave it overnight, just like that. And then tomorrow I'll come and see what I've got. Exciting! Now I have to turn the phone off with my dry thumb. Okay, I've cut my piece, or torn rather, my piece of raw silk noil in half. And half I'm going to keep as it is, and the other half I'm going to put in an iron water bath. Now here is my jar of iron water. It is made by putting rusty scrap in the bottom of the jar, just a few chunks, and then about half water and half white vinegar to start it off. You don't want the lid of the jar to be tight, or you want to punch some holes in the lid. I just leave my lid a bit loose, because then if I have to take it, if I'm teaching or something, I can obviously tighten the lid up to transport it. And I remember that my lid's loose, so I don't pick it up by the lid. Now, there's no point in me telling you a quantity, because this is not the scientific measurement, a few bits of rusty scrap in a jar of water. I go by colour. It's not very strong. I gave it a shake. That's another reason I don't do the holes in the lid thing. You can tighten the lid to shake it. And to my eye, it's quite weak, so I'm going to put a goodly amount in. That's the scientific measurement. I'm going to endeavour to do it with one hand. I've got a glove on. Sorry, I hope I didn't frighten you with the sudden glove coming in. So maybe that much. And you can see from my jar, I guess that was a couple of cupfuls. Give it a sloosh around. This pot's already had iron in it before. I do think, like I said before, that the fact that my stick that I wrapped my thread round had been used for eco-printing with iron, there was iron in, which is why it's already quite green. So I'm not really expecting a change. But if you do this and all your stuff's clean, and you don't put a eco-printing stick in, and it comes out yellow or, paler, you can try this iron bath thing. Don't put wool in an iron bath. Wool doesn't like iron. But you can put silk or cellulose fibres. And there's that mark that I think came from the stick. You see that dark mark there? So I'm going to leave it in there for maybe 10 minutes. It should happen pretty instantly, but I'm just going to leave it for 10 minutes. Time to go make a cup of tea. And there's still colour in the dye bath, so I think I'm going to put in, I've got another bit of woolly blanket and the rest of the silk noil. I might as well, even if they're very, very pale, it's a start. They can always be over-dyed if I'm not happy with the colour. And then once I've done that dye bath, I can just pour it actually on my tomatoes, because there'll be nitrogen in it and they'll like that. Not on the actual tomatoes, on the plant roots. Okay, so I'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll see what change, if any, has happened. Just come back to say two things. One is this is the hank of Cotswold yarn that I put in the dye bath after I'd taken the other cloths out. I shouldn't have I'm just thrown it on the floor. Excuse me while I pick it up, and I should not have touched it. Oh no, that's alright, that hand was in the glove. You don't want iron water to touch anything that you don't want dark marks on, including your hands. And also if you've got sensitive skin, I'm just going to hold it, it's not going to stay there. If you've got sensitive skin, be very careful with iron. If you've got little cuts in your hand, do wear gloves. But if you drop it on your clothing or on your dyed cloth that you don't want to get it on, you see the dark mark that was on my cloth where it was touching it in the pan. So yeah, just be very, very careful with iron. If you're into natural dyeing, try and keep a separate pan for iron and keep another pan that you never put iron in, because no matter how much you scrub it and scour it, it'll always sadden everything that goes in future. I nearly always put iron in, so I've never been very careful about that. It's only that I had that new pot that my neighbour gave me, and then I went and spoilt it by putting one of my eco printing sticks in it. But yeah, I'm just telling you, you know, as always, the proper way. I do it my slapdash way. So let's leave that for 10 minutes, have a cup of tea. You won't have to wait. And then we'll compare it with the other piece that hasn't been saddened in the iron water. Okay, so while the iron bath is, you know, brewing, whatever's happening there, the volume of water was quite low. You can see by the dark mark around my pot how much the dye bath had dropped. So I boiled a full kettle for my cup of tea, and then I put the rest of the hot water in, and I've just put the electric on it for maybe 5 minutes, you know, the hob. And you see how it's steaming. I hope you can see that. I'm just going to turn that off now and leave it, because I have a thing with not using a lot of energy, not my own energy, but you know, resources when eco printing and natural dyeing. In France I had access to I had a fire pit, and I had access to old barn wood and things like that, so I could, you know, I didn't worry. But now I'm on the grid again. Yeah, so I do this very little and not very often. So that's just me, you know, you can obviously make your own choices, but I don't think this needs to heat really. I just want to get any last bit of colour out of there, and you see that blanket, although it's wet, obviously it will dry much lighter, but that is picking up colour. And it does tend to be looking more towards the brown at this stage, which is interesting. That's with natural dyes as well. Often plants have many different chemicals within them. Madder, for example, the red colour that you get from the roots, you can get everything from yellow through pink through orange and all the shades of brown from madder, depending on the heat of your bath, the pH and so on. It's fascinating. And it's the same with the simple plant like the nettle. You know, like I said, I would expect more green in the spring and more towards yellow now. I've got green. That might be because it was new growth. That might be because of the iron in my famous stick, which is laying here. So I'm going to leave this overnight. I'm going to get my cloth out of my iron water and just rinse it. And then tomorrow, when everything's washed and dry, and I'm only rinsing the iron, I will wash properly with some dish soap. Is actually good to use, you know, washing up liquid. Or I use an eco one, or you can just use a vegetable hand soap, just rub your hands in the water. But iron, you need to give it a thorough wash. The pure nettle, you can just rinse it. You don't even need to use soap. You know, it smells delicious. It's not toxic. It's actually, you know, got allegedly it puts its properties into the cloth. So yeah, but the iron you really do need to wash properly, and you really want to hand wash it really well before you put it in your washing machine. You don't really want to, you know, put rusty water in your washing machine, do you? But yeah, the nettles I'll just rinse and dry. So next thing you'll see will be all the cloths and the threads and the wool all washed, dried and ironed. I will iron them, and then we'll see the results that we've got. Okay, so I hope that was all clear and interesting and whatever, if you're inspired to have a go, and if you're not inspired to have a go, I hope you enjoyed the video anyway. So here are, sorry, my stand decided to droop a bit. I hope that didn't disturb you. Here are the 3 pieces of cloth that I put in the initial dye bath. So this is the piece of my old apron.
And you see it's still got some of the stitching in, which I've left in deliberately. And it's definitely coloured. I should have had another piece handy to compare. But anyway, it's definitely coloured. It's quite pale, but I do like it. And this will probably be the star piece in the little pouch that I want to make. And I very likely will make that with you in a future week, maybe on the Slow Stitch Friday. Here is the greedy bit of woolly blanket. And this is what I was talking about, because I wound one of my threads around, like you saw that wooden dowel that I've been using for eco printing. So that was impregnated with tannin and iron from being used in eco printing, and that is what has marked the woolly blanket. But I like that, you know, I like that. If you don't like that, then don't put things like that in your dye bath. And there's the other side as well, with these lovely marks. So that's that. And this is half of the original piece of silk noil that I put in, because I tore it in half and I put the other half in the iron, and I'll show you that in a minute to contrast. And that's just a beautiful colour. This is the kind of nettle-y colour that I was hoping for, and again these little marks come from that irony stick. So if I fold that piece in half, and then I bring in this other piece. Now this was the piece that so this was the same cloth, the same dye bath, but this piece I dipped in the iron. And I hope you can see that that has come out significantly greener in comparison to the original one. I hope the colours are showing up, because I can see them here. I'm standing up so I can see what you see. And I can see them in real life much better than they're looking on my screen. So I hope that they're, you know, good enough on your screen. So yeah, you see that the iron really brought out the green. So if you want green, if you do this and you prefer the greener colour, then that's the way to do it. Do some rusty water. I think prefer this colour myself, but you know, that's just personal choice. It's nice to have both. And then the threads I put in originally were got them in here. These two, which I've now wound around a lolly stick. So this is the silk, and you see that's significantly green. That's the silk thread. And this was the hank of DMC white thread, which is kind of greenish, brownish. It's beautiful actually, it's really variegated. So I'm looking forward to using those, certainly in the pouch as well. And then in that same dye bath I put some wooden beads. These were little raw wood beads that I had knocking about, and I just put them in the dye bath, so they've come out that same kind of nettle-y green as well, because I thought I can use one or more of those on my pouch, you know, on the twine to tie it up or whatever. And then this in the second subsequent, the same dye bath, after I'd done all that I just showed you, after I'd done all this and the beads, I then saw there was still colour in it, so I had another piece of woolly blanket and another piece of the silk noil, so I put those in. And here is the woolly blanket. You see it's much paler, and it is more sort of buttery yellow with a hint of green. And if I compare that to the initial bit of woolly blanket, you see there's quite a significant difference in colour, but this is still beautiful. And the subsequent piece of silk noil has also come out that same kind of colour. If I compare that with the original one, this was the original unironed one, the one not unironed like this, but not with the iron water. You see it's the same colour, it's just a paler shade of it. So yeah, I was very happy with all that. I've got a lovely pile of cloth of different colours and types. I'll just lay them all out for you. This piece of woolly blanket that went in the first dye bath, as like I said, has been greedy and has taken lots of the colour for itself. And there's that little piece of linen. And then there's my one thread. Where's the other thread gone? There it is. There's the other thread, and there's my little wooden beads. So that was the dye bath. Oh, and the other thing was I had some a hank of Cotswold wool that Teresa brought me to my group's exhibition in Nailsworth last year. It was undyed, spun by her especially for me, and I put that in as well. And I've used quite a lot of it to make my little bowl that I'll show you in a minute. But that, again, I didn't mordant. It should have had the potassium alum sulfate mordant for wool. I didn't, I just put it in like that. But yeah, it's still a lovely colour. So there we go. So that's all my, stay there, all my dyeing, experimentations and beautifulness. So then my net, ooh, that's a bead going on the floor, I'll get that later. So then I made some nettle string. Here's my nettle string. I think I've shown you in another video. And actually this month's Ko-fi video I showed how I made the twine, but I followed the method in one of Sally Pointer's videos. Sally Pointer's got a channel here on YouTube, and she does all kinds of ancient crafts, the traditional way she uses flint tools often and things like that. And she's got a video how to make nettle twine, and that's what I followed to make that. And this I made this little bit originally because I thought then it can. There's another bead. Stels, don't eat it. There's a good girl. Leave it. No, leave it. And get it before she does. I thought that I can use that to twine my pouch closed, you know, as a twine for my pouch. So looking at all this, I think I can make several pouches if I want to. I'll see if I make several pouches, I don't know. Just see where we get to. So I'll just put that to one side, and then I made my little bowl coming in now. Here it is. So I made this in exactly the same way as the cloth twine bowls, which are in my cloth twine playlist. Now you can make these just with the fibres. People make them just with the bunches of fibres and then do the stitching. I made the twine first and then made the bowl, and it was so lovely to make, and I'm so happy with it. It's quite sturdy and it smells divine. I expect the smell will fade away. And then after I'd twined, I went round with the nettle dyed wool right around the rim of it as well. So yeah, so I'm really happy with that. So if you fancy making cordage, or you do make cordage, you can go to that cloth twine video and just substitute your cordage for the cloth twine, if you don't already know how to do this, and make yourself a little vessel like that. I just love it. That was about 16 feet of cordage I measured. Made that bowl, you see against my hands there how big it is. Yeah, and I'll put the beads in it so that they don't all roll on the floor. And I can put that in it, and I can put those in it, and that leftover bit of wool. There we go. And then, like I said, I used the dye bath that was left over to do some eco printing. So I got two, sorry, I'm just making a bit more room. I had a piece of flannel sheet, old flannel sheet, and I just kind of chucked in all kinds of stuff. I'm thinking of making an art piece based on the woodland, and so I put in a leaf or two from every species, knowing full well that some would print better than others. And I have done eco-printing before with you in an episode of Park Home Life. I'll try and link that one as well. So I just did this on my own. These especially, this is the walnut, came out very well. And these the sycamores and the oaks. Small walnut, rose, wild rose. That's actually ash, which often doesn't print very well, but it has done there. And that's twice that size. That's quite a big piece of cloth. It's about a yard square. And there's the other side. And there the oaks printed with more of a greenish tinge. And also here, this is mountain ash or rowan. And often that doesn't print for me, but it has here. So yeah, I'm really happy with that. And the other piece that I did was linen. It's a bit of vintage linen, and I'll do you half and half because that's the best way. And it didn't print as well as the flannelette sheet. I find that old flannel sheets really, because they're so porous, really work well for natural dyeing or eco printing. Linen's always harder to print than cotton in my experience, but still I'm very happy with it. It's very beautiful. Again, the walnut. And this, because I put all the leaves in, I can now go and maybe select my leaves with a bit more care as to which ones are working for me and which ones aren't. And I could also, as well, if I wasn't happy with this, which I think I am, I don't think I'm going to do it, but you could also go and eco-print it again and just kind of strategically place your leaves in any areas that you think are a bit plain, you know? So you could, and I often do that, and you get these beautiful multi-layered cloths that kind of, they call it like a forest floor effect, so you don't see the distinct individual leaves as such. It looks like, yeah, forest floor. Up there as well, you see. That's also walnut, I think. I'm not even sure what that is. So yeah, so there we go. So I had a lot of fun out of that one little basket full of nettles. Let me just put everything back in for you to have one last look. So there we go. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you're inspired to have a go yourself with nettles if you've got them, or if not, something else that you have got. Feel free to ask questions down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. It's a very broad subject, so it's very difficult to you know, give a fully comprehensive guide in the space of an hour's video, but I've done my best and I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you so much for watching. As always, lots of love and kisses, and I'll see you next time for more park home life. Bye bye.